Hi there, and welcome to Over the Garden Fence. My name is Helen Willoughby-Peck, and I'm a University of California Master Gardener. We're located here in Mariposa County, which is in California, and in the central Sierra Nevada foothills. For those of you that are unfamiliar with what Master Gardeners do, we are university-trained volunteers that work with local home gardeners, providing research-based information on sustainable landscaping, on pest management, on general horticulture practices, and in general just working to help solve some of the problems that home gardeners might have. So it's the middle of May, and I'm about to plant some sweet potato plants out, and I'm just going to do a little program on how to grow sweet potatoes. So a sweet potato is a tuberous root that is believed to have originated from Central and South America. It's part of the morning glory family, and it's very easy to grow plants from a sweet potato tuber. So unlike normal vegetables that are grown from seed, sweet potatoes are grown from slips, which is just another name for the stems that sprout naturally out of a sweet potato. So this sweet potato here, you'll see all these little dots all over it. These are called nodes, and the slips grow out of the nodes, so potentially every one of these dots could produce a slip. And the average sweet potato produces between 10 and 50 slips, and a single slip can produce between 4 and 10 pounds of sweet potatoes. So you don't need very many sweet potatoes to produce sweet potatoes. You can purchase slips mail order or online. Most companies deliver throughout the continental United States. I've been told that some companies, or many companies, won't ship to California, but I did a little spot checking and I did find a few companies that would send slips to California. However, I did read that there were some problems where the Department of Agriculture will hold the slips for too long, and by the time they reach the customer, they're either in very poor shape or dead. So it's best to try to grow your own slips. If you really don't want to grow your own slips and you live in California, I suggest that you try to contact the Livingston Farmers Association. Livingston is considered the sweet potato capital of California, and California is the second largest grower of sweet potatoes in the country. So if you try to contact the Farmers Association in Livingston, they might be able to refer you to a farmer that's willing to sell you some slips. You can also purchase sweet potatoes, the potato or the tuber itself, online or mail order, and if you're looking for specific varieties, that's probably the way to go. Or you can do what I did. I just went to the grocery store and I bought some sweet potatoes. So a few words about purchasing sweet potatoes from the grocery store. It's advisable that you use organic sweet potatoes because non-organic sweet potatoes sometimes are treated with a material that inhibits the sprouts from developing when they're sitting around in your pantry. I, however, just bought non-organic sweet potatoes and I had really good success with it. So there's several ways to grow sweet potatoes, and so the first way and the easiest way, the old-fashioned way, is to just cut up your sweet potato and put it in water, suspend it in water with toothpicks, just like you did with an avocado pit when you were a kid. Another way to do it is to take a whole sweet potato and put that in water, suspended with toothpicks in water. You can partially bury a sweet potato horizontally in soil or compost, or you can completely bury the sweet potato in soil or compost. So I experimented with a few things. My first method was to try cutting up a sweet potato and suspending it in water, and I didn't have very good success with that. All these sweet potatoes were started about 9 weeks ago, and I was just about to toss this thing out when I noticed these teensy-weensy little sprouts starting to come out. This method, the whole sweet potato in the water, I had a lot more success. I had some really good root development, and I have some nice long slips on it, but maybe only about 8 or 10 of them. This method, I've grown two sweet potatoes this way, and it doesn't look like there's a lot of sweet potatoes on them, but I've already plucked off about 25 sweet potatoes from these two potatoes and planted them, or planted some of them. About a dozen of them had roots on them, and I just planted them directly into the soil. And the other dozen didn't have roots on them. And so I was a little nervous because we had some heat coming. Weather here in May can be kind of unpredictable, and it was supposed to be in the 90s, and I didn't want to stress the sweet potatoes out by planting them without roots. So I suspended them in water, and I've grown some nice root systems out here. And what I'd like to show you just quickly is the roots don't just come out of the bottom of the sweet potato slip, they actually grow out of the stem as well. And so if you leave them in water or even plant them in the soil, they'll grow roots all along the stem. And so when you plant them fairly deeply, several inches deep, 2 to 3, maybe even more inches deeply. So what I've learned from trying out these different methods is I probably never will use this method again. I wondered if I made a mistake by not putting the sweet potato raw flesh side down into the water, but I was concerned that that would cause the potato to rot a lot quicker. This method was successful, but I didn't get as many sweet potato slips off of it. So I would probably in the future use the method of laying the sweet potato horizontally on some soil. In my case, I used compost, or I would completely cover them with soil, which I think was probably the best, is the best idea, because then I'll get roots growing out of all of the sweet potato slips, and I don't have to transfer them to water to get them to grow out slips. So the next step is to plant both these sweet potato starts that had the roots on them and the sweet potatoes slips that are in the water that have lots of roots on them. So let's go plant. So we're about ready to plant our sweet potatoes. You can see over here where I've planted these other sweet potatoes about 3.5 weeks ago. You're supposed to wait till they're about 6 to 8 inches tall, but I got anxious and I went ahead and planted them when they were about 2 to 3 inches tall, and you can see they've done just fine. So when you're ready to choose the location where you're going to plant your sweet potatoes, you have certain things to take into consideration. First, you don't want to plant out before it's consistently 75 degrees or higher every day, and they like fairly warm nights. They are completely intolerant of cold. And in fact, I forgot to mention when I was talking about starting the slips that the slips started in the water were started on a warm, sunny windowsill in the kitchen. And the sweet potatoes that were started horizontally in the compost were started on heat mats because it was still quite chilly in March when I started them. So if you live in an area where the soil doesn't stay that warm, it's hard to keep high temperatures any length of time, you could consider putting some black plastic down on the soil and poking holes in it and planting the sweet potatoes in the holes, because the black plastic will help maintain the heat in the soil. They're very, very intolerant of frost, and so if you happen to have a sudden surprise frost, you should come out and cover them somehow, either with boxes or buckets, or if you happen to have row covers to protect them against the frost, because if the vines die from the frost, the roots themselves will tend to rot. So the other considerations, one is you need to have full sun, 8 to 10 hours of sun a day. Sweet potatoes need a big area to grow in. They have copious amounts of vines and can just completely take over a huge area of your soil. So either you have to commit that amount of space to them, or you have to consider trellising them. So what we're going to do is go ahead and put a trellis up against this fence here and allow them to grow up the trellis over to the fence and then just spread out across the fence. So you want really lightweight, loose soil to grow your sweet potatoes so that they can expand to become as large as potentially they can. And you also want to consider that they have a very long growing season, usually between 100 and 160 days. So you won't be able to plant anything else in this bed until winter comes along if you want to have a winter garden, because they're going to take the whole summer to grow out. There's different recommendations from different universities about how far apart to plant the sweet potatoes, anywhere from 6 inches to a foot apart, with rows anywhere from a foot to 3 to 4 feet apart. Now this is the only bed I have space in right now to plant, so I'm just going to make this work, and I'm sure it'll be just fine. So what you do is you just take your sweet potato and you pluck off the slip. This one doesn't have any roots. You dig a hole a couple of inches deep, you put it in the soil, and you're good to go. You should water them in immediately after you plant them. They need a decent amount of water at the beginning when you've just planted them, but they're fairly drought tolerant. So as the season goes on, you should really let the soil dry out a little bit between waterings. They generally don't need fertilizer. If you're compelled to fertilize, what you're going to do is cause the vines to grow more aggressively. It doesn't really help the sweet potato tubers themselves. And there's very few pests, actually. I have read that flea beetles can be a problem, but interestingly, right next to these sweet potatoes, we have flea beetles attacking our eggplant, and they haven't attacked the sweet potatoes at all. By the way, sweet potato leaves are edible, and they can be used in a salad, or they can be sauteed up much like any other green, like spinach or chard. They can be a little bitter in the salad, if that's what you like, but by sauteing them, it reduces the bitterness, and they're very nice that way. Birds can get after them, and we protect our garden using these stakes and this plastic reflective tape, which is specifically designed to deter birds. We just put a clothespin on it and stick it in the ground, and the breeze flutters the tape around, and it has been very successful in keeping the birds off of our crops. It's readily available at most nurseries on a roll. So off we go, and we'll get back to you on how to harvest and storage next. So we've just planted our sweet potatoes, so we have no way to demonstrate how to harvest them or cure them or store them. So I'm just going to tell you about it. In the fall, hopefully we'll have an opportunity to add a segment to this video showing you, demonstrating for you how it's done. But in the meantime, I'll give you the information verbally. So you should harvest your sweet potatoes in the fall when they reach about 5 to 6 inches long and about 2 inches in diameter. You definitely want to harvest before the first frost. Because, as I mentioned earlier, frost can damage the vines, and if the vines get damaged, the sweet potatoes will rapidly rot. So once they're harvested, you dig them up and you put them on the ground for a little while, a few hours maybe, and let them dry out. And then you want to bring them in and cure them for 5 to 10 days. So curing allows the sweetness of the sweet potato to develop, and it allows some of the damage that might have occurred while you were digging them up to heal over, and it actually improves how long you can store your sweet potatoes. So curing is done by placing the sweet potatoes in a warm and very warm environment, 80 to 90 degrees with very high humidity. And of course in California we don't have that kind of climate in the fall, and so you have to artificially provide that kind of environment. And a couple of suggestions to do that are to put them in a box and put them by a fireplace or a heater vent or a space heater and cover them with a wet towel. Or you could possibly put them in another room somewhere and close the room up, put a space heater on low, and put a humidifier in there. So after 5 to 10 days, you can store them in a cool, dark place, and you should be able to store them for up to a year.